Disharmony hits Eurovision with Israel at the center. One of the kibbutzim attacked on October the 7th makes a big decision, and a conversation about rising anti-Semitism on the American right. It's Unholy. I'm Jonathan Friedland in London.
And I'm Yonit Levy in Tel Aviv. Unholy, two Jews on the news. I'm trying to restrain myself, but I'm going to have to talk about the weather again, okay? So you're going to have to sit through this, Jonathan. But it's been a bit of a stormy Thursday today because the storm named Byron, which I like a lot, being the English Lit degree holder among the two of us, and an Englishman as well, probably likes Byron as well. So the storm has hit Israel, and perhaps because we're addicted to drama, it's been big news here. I mean, the sky is gray, there's thunder, pouring rain, and so the headline I'm reading you from ynetnews.com. Storm Byron set to unleash torrential rain across Israel. Quote, Tel Aviv won't be fully protected. End quote.
It's sorry, I shouldn't laugh because I'm sure it's very, very serious. This sort of rain is what we here call Thursday or Wednesday or Tuesday, maybe sometimes Friday. It's a routine experience for us, but I love the idea that, I mean, in a way, it's sort of touching because it's so rare for you to get a big downpour. This is really very ordinary in Northern Europe, where I am sitting. But what's the unprepared thing? Like, what's the preparation that Israelis should have made for this that they haven't?
I mean, so the interesting thing, I had a friend call me from New York telling me the story how it's like -8 degrees there. And she's calling her sister, and her sister is saying, I'm preparing for a big storm. And she looks at the Weather Channel. It's like 20 degrees in Tel Aviv. So yes, no, look, up until this, the whole thing with the storm was that it's going to be a lot of rain in a very short period of time. We're here, we're still surviving it, but it's, I should say it's a bit of a respite from the usual news. So everyone is very focused on this storm. I was just loving the name given by the Greeks, by the way. It was their turn to choose a name for the storm.
Right. I never knew how that worked, actually. I feel very attached to this storm because my publishers here in Britain is John Murray, which is such an old publisher. They were the publisher of Lord Byron. So I mean,
nice.
It's good lineage, don't you think?
That's very nice. I mean, if we want to connect it, I think the early Zionists had a very strong connection to the Romantic movement. I'm not making this up. It is true. But not my... Who's your favorite Romantic movement writer, Jonathan? Is it Lord Byron?
Well, I'm going to say Byron simply because of the... But no, William Blake obviously would be right in there as well. The great...
Mary
hymn,
Shelley Girl,
course,
myself.
Okay, I mean, definitely in there. No, the great hymn of English Romanticism is, of course, called Jerusalem. I mean, which is one of those very neat linkages between our two countries. But talking about the weather is obviously England's and Britain's national pastime. So I'm very glad to see Israelis are coming on board and realizing the joy of talking about the weather.
But I'm glad you've been interested. I just will tell you, answering your question about the unpreparedness, is that the director of the Yarkon Drainage and Rivers Authority said that no city can withstand 100 millimeters of rain in 24 hours. And if this happens in Tel Aviv, it will be a catastrophic event. We cannot fully protect the city. So let's hope we're not heading towards that. But that was where the quote, Israel, Tel Aviv cannot be protected will come from.
And joking apart, if a city is not prepared, things can obviously happen. So, it's like Americans mock Britons and other Europeans actually mock Britons about snow because this country, totally unprepared for snow. It doesn't happen that often. And each time it does happen, the Germans or the Swiss or whatever just go, 2 inches of snow, it's nothing, So I relate.
The same you gave me basically just now.
Yeah, it's an international we have some business to transact. We need to tell our listeners about something very exciting that it's kind of experimental that we have
I would
coming
say
up.
To boldly go where no news podcast has gone before. Do you like that? It's from a science fiction program. Perhaps you've never seen it.
I did get the reference, of course. No, early Star Trek, by the way, I was a fan of. First series.
The William Shatner?
Love that. It's afterwards I lost interest. But the OG Star Trek...
So Patrick Stewart did not do it for you, but William Shatner did?
Correct. Anyway, we're wandering off the point.
What kind of Englishman are you?
He's Scottish, obviously, isn't he? Patrick Stewart? Maybe not. Well, the name suggests it. Anyway, look, we're really getting very, very diverted. So,
I'm sorry.
Orna Guralnik.
Yes.
Tell us
Yes.
about her and what she's going
So
to do.
what we've decided since the war seems to be over, we've finally decided to embark on an idea that we've wanted to do for a very long time. And we'll call it, for now, a working title, Listeners Therapy. We've had so many people come up to us from the Unholy community and beyond, right, talk about their arguments that they've had with their families. It's been a real tumultuous 2 years that kind of shook up and even broke up relationships inside families, between friends, over Israel and Gaza. I mean, you and I obviously have had our difficult moments at times, and we decided to recruit an expert. Dr. Orna Guralnik is a clinical psychologist at the Trauma Studies program at NYU. She teaches there. She's the star of a critically acclaimed Showtime docuseries called Couples Therapy, and we kind of wanted to use her expertise, very aligned with our thinking, by the way. When you hear, she talks about active listening and not being judgmental, but being curious, all of these things. What we would ask our listeners is to please write in and send your any kind of conflict resolution inside your family between friends that you want solved. And she would do that. She will do that for us on air, so to speak. I mean, she will talk with the couples and try to solve whatever ails them. We will say what our email is, Jonathan. I think that's your role.
Yes, it is unholy at unholy-media.com. So unholy at unholy-or-media.com. I was just going to say that Orna Guralnik, obviously known to people, viewers around the world for this show, Couples Therapy. We are, as you explained, looking for couples in the broadest sense, meaning pairs of people who are, it can be grandmother and grandson, it can be father and daughter, it can be any kind of combination, siblings.
Two friends.
I know myself. It can be two friends. It can be any relationship that has been under strain because of the events of the last 2+ years. I know myself, people have told me about, brothers who actually were not talking and then found themselves talking again because of this conflict. In fact, in that particular case, it was because of Unholy. They both listened to Unholy, living abroad, they had got to the point where they couldn't talk about this subject. And they brought, this brought them together in conversation. We would now like to do that with Orna, dispensing her expertise and her very, a well-tuned ear to those dynamics.
And we will emphasize that whoever we choose will be on the actual episode. So we will listen to them and listen to their story, and they will tell it to us and tell it to Orna. So, that entails being on our episode, of course.
Yes, exactly. It will be your voices. We won't be talking about you. We will hear you. And the reference, you called it Listeners Therapy. That's a reference, of course, to our episode we did very early on, I think November 2023, called War Therapy. And people do still respond to that. So unholy at unholy-media.com. I should just fact check myself. Patrick Stewart is actually English. You were right. From Yorkshire in England. To me, it sounded very Scottish name.
Well, what did you say just then?
Yes, I've said it before, Yonit. I know. You were right about him being English. He's not Scottish. But I still didn't watch him in Star Trek. So I don't know how good you can feel, Sir Patrick,
I
about
feel
that.
very good about myself now.
Shall we talk about this event, which is very easy, like I'll talk about the weather, very easy to dismiss as the sort of fluffy stuff, but I think is becoming important and serious, which is Eurovision. The number of countries now boycotting the Eurovision Song Contest for 2026 has reached 5. Iceland joining, Spain, Ireland, Slovenia, and the Netherlands in saying it will not take part in the 2026 Eurovision Song Contest over Israel's continuing participation in the competition. Just last week, there was a meeting of the European Broadcasting Union, and they decided actually not to table the vote that they were going to have about whether Israel could participate or not, which means, in effect, Israel continue. And these 5 national broadcasters have decided they will not take part as a result. Just before we plunge into it, just explain what I think, because Americans and others perhaps don't, follow this. Eurovision is a very big deal. I mean, in a way that, a massive sporting boycott of the Olympics or of the World Cup would be a very big deal. Obviously, North America is not part of it, but Australia is, Europe, a very expanded definition of Europe, many countries take part, and annually it is just a very big showbiz event. Initially it was sort of an object of mockery, still is a bit, for being super kitsch, super camp, but it brings tens, hundreds of millions of people as an audience. And this issue of a boycott, in a way, the cultural boycott of Israel, it's hard to think of a bigger stage it's had than this. So that's just to tee up why I think it's worthy of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it is, as you said, it's more than music. It's politics as well. And of course, Israel was very concerned that if indeed it would be barred from participating in the Eurovision, that would mean a lot of other things, right? It's a slippery slope that can mean things for sports tournaments and things like that. I find it really interesting that the war is over and yet this is continuing. I think there are many people who thought and perhaps hoped, including here in Israel, or maybe particularly here in Israel, that if this ends, then we will see the end of these kinds of boycotts. The focus would move elsewhere. It's not. So as you mentioned, 5 countries. To me, what is interesting, first of all, the responses here, of course, were, from either Dana International, who won the Eurovision, saying, that this is the attempt to boycott Israel is insulting in the way that Israel, tries to. She talked about the gay community, how liberal Israel is relative to other nations. You had Alon Ohel, who was held by Hamas for more than 700 days, saying music is supposed to unite people. It's not supposed to be something made into this kind of incitement against Israel. To me, what I find very interesting, I read the line, Iceland wanted the EBU to exclude Kan. Kan is Israel's public broadcaster. And at the same time that we're having this conversation, Kan is almost fighting for its life when hit by Netanyahu's government's attempt to curtail its budget. So everyone thinking about Israel as this sort of monolith and everyone agreeing with the government and whatever the government is doing, you have to think about the fact that there are many Israelis, including, in different broadcast networks, that think otherwise. And the fact that you want to boycott them is not the, I think, way to move forward in any possible direction.
So obviously it's puzzling to Israel supporters who think, look, the ceasefire, surely this is all over now. I think what the boycotters would say is there is still killing going on. The estimate is more than 350 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli action since the ceasefire, and that Israel is obviously, as part of the ceasefire deal, still has a presence in 50+% of the Gaza Strip, and therefore it's still continuing. And only when those things are wound back will they drop their campaign. I don't know, because they're not really explaining that case. But my guess, if you ask them as to why this continues and the ceasefire doesn't appear to have made a difference, that probably maybe would be their response. We talked about this just the other day, how so often boycotts, cultural boycotts, academic boycotts, they so often run into exactly this wall, which is the people they end up boycotting, because it always has to be a specific person. You can't just say imprint or institution. It so often ends up boycotting or punishing the very people who should be seen as allies of those who want to see change in Israel, or a different line on the Israel-Palestine conflict. I've mentioned them before, partly because they performed at our live show, Oy Favoy, this London bass band that plays kind of world music, a sort of fusion of klezmer and Middle Eastern music, that they ran into, a sort of cancellation situation over their Israeli singer. And the point they make, not that this should make a difference, but what the point they make is, their singer happens to be someone who, every weekend was there at those anti-war protests, those protests demanding an end to the war. It just so often ends up this way, partly because who is it who's involved in culture? Who is it that's at the leading edge of culture? It will so often in every society be people who are more dissenting, more liberal. That's just the nature of who is, involved in art. So this is yet another example of that. I agree with you about the striking thing being about this being the fact that it's coming even after the ceasefire. Yeah. The organisers, the European Broadcasting Union themselves, postponed the vote that they were due to have about Israel's participation because of the ceasefire. They themselves thought this is now, as it were, if not moot, it is at least kind of on hold. They postponed the vote, and it's because this vote didn't happen that these others have taken part. It does raise a really interesting question of when will this ever end? Because if the ceasefire means it does not bring a pause in this kind of activity, is this going to then just be kind of permanent? Even though the boycotters are saying it's because of what happened in Gaza. So is it going to be like this retrospective boycott? Just one other thing. The boycotters cite as precedent the exclusion of Russia from the Eurovision Song Contest ever since the invasion of Ukraine. And their position is that obviously that war is ongoing, so you can see why Russia would still be excluded.
Yes.
But I thought this was very telling.
And of course, Russia started the war, which Israel didn't, right?
Well, this is exactly what I was going to get to. So this singer, the Austrian singer, who is the current champion, of, if you like, the winner, because the contest in 26 is going to be held in Vienna because Austria were the previous winner. That's how it works in Eurovision. Again, for our American listeners, the hosting nation is always the previous year's winner.
I'm sitting there going, why are you explaining this to me? I know this. Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's not big in the States, Eurovision. So the winner, JJ Piech, said this: "I'm very disappointed that Russia was left out and Israel was left in. They are both bellicose aggressors." Which I think is such an interesting word to have used, because it just excludes, it just omits from the account October 7th. And we've argued and debated lots about the conduct of the war, but I don't think anybody disputes that the war was not started. The post-October 7 war was started by a Hamas attack on Israel that Israel then fought back. So it's really, to me, it's interesting that there's this equation with Russia. They're both aggressors and they should be excluded. It's this thing that a lot of people are cloudy on the facts of what happens in this conflict.
Cloudy or don't like to think. Is this the opportunity for us to say that Israel is also extremely good at Eurovision? I mean, we won 4 times, just mentioning that Iceland, for example, never won. Just thought I'd throw that in. But Israel won 4 times. And in fact, if I could just make this claim, I think in recent years, we were extremely good at Eurovision. I mean, the songs are great. Like, remind whoever managed to forget this, Yuval Raphael was, survived October 7th. This still didn't prevent many people from trying to boycott Israel when she appeared on the Eurovision stage last year. But I think one of those songs was definitely good enough to even win, either Edin Golan with Hurricane or her song. But that didn't happen because of, Israel's political situation in the world. So we should also say that we're very good.
Just on that, because this was the other thing.
Are you going to argue that we're very good?
No, but the success rate is amazing. I mean, if we're going to get into the full weeds of this, Ireland, who are really leading the charge to exclude Israel, are, alongside Sweden, the only country who've won 7 times. So the Eurovision's a really big deal in Ireland, and they are really out front on this issue. We talked about Ireland last week in the context of renaming a park in Dublin. So Ireland, it's really becoming definitional of their foreign policy, actually, their opposition to Israel. But I just want to say something about Israel's success rate, because that too was the subject of a discussion at this Broadcasting Union meeting. They did not have a vote on excluding Israel, but they did pass, actually, before, a new raft of measures designed, as they put it, to protect the integrity of the vote. This came after suspicions, or more than suspicions actually, that Israel was involved at a sort of governmental level in the public vote. And there was, there was criticism of the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu, from his own personal social media account, urged his 1.5 million followers, I think, to vote for Israel. There were government-owned advertising agencies really involved. There was previously the ability individually you could vote 20 times for Israel. It's thought that quite a lot of particularly Jewish communities around the world did that, and they've now changed the rules, so you will be able to vote a maximum of 10 times. I think people did think, when Israel did unbelievably well, I think it won the public vote in the last contest, only came second overall, people thought, okay, this is organized in some way. So there's an attempt to sort of get at that. I'm picking up your point about the success rate. Even that was under questioning at the last meeting.
Moving on from Eurovision to what is happening here on the ground in Israel. And one of the more I think, heartbreaking or gut-wrenching issues that the different townships and kibbutzim on the envelope, on the Gazan envelope are dealing with, is the question of how much, when you want to rebuild your kibbutz, how much do you leave to memory, and what do you do with all of the houses that have been either burnt or destroyed in the terrible attack and massacre of October 7th. And Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the targets of this terrible attack, decided, after a very sort of difficult, I think, deliberation, to essentially demolish all of the homes that were destroyed, barring one, leaving one as a sort of a shrine or a memory for what happened, but then to destroy everything else. This obviously was a very difficult vote. If I remember correctly, it was 196 members who decided to go that way, and 146 who decided who thought differently. But that is what the kibbutz finally decided. One of the members, who also was a commander in Gaza, said the words, and it's difficult to say, but I'll just quote him on what he said in a report that we edited on the news. He said, "We don't want to live in Auschwitz," which is an understandable thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking back, as a younger man I lived on a kibbutz where each week there would be the Asefa, the big collective discussion, and those votes. And there's an intensity to that kind of democratic participation because it's not mediated, it's not through representatives or delegates, or it's the people themselves making that decision. I can only imagine the sort of sobriety of that conversation, a huge thing. I sort of get the decision, and I think I can imagine having voted on the side that in the end we're in the majority if I'd been involved in that conversation, simply because it has to be about looking forward. Be'eri was one of the kibbutzim I visited just a few weeks after October the 7th. In fact, it was the first of the attacked kibbutzim that I did visit, and it was all over. I mean, it was everywhere. It was not just one sort of neighborhood of the kibbutz. It was, you'd go from, it's funny to talk in terms of streets, but people who know a kibbutz will know it's not quite streets, but one area, neighborhood after another, just, ashen, incinerated, charred, walls ridden with bullet holes, torched, just everywhere. And I think if the community is to have a future, I can see really the case that it would be impossible to sort of live all the time with that. I can imagine a nuance on this would be: is one really enough? Should it be a little row of 3 or 4 houses just in case there's damage or something? But the principle I really do get, and I think it's a declaration, a statement by them that they plan to live and they plan to have a future. I wonder if other kibbutzim, this is obviously a decision they're all going to have to make one way or another. Is this now going to be the lead, or will some decide that, look, actually, there will be an interest. People all over the world will still want to come and look. And actually, there's a value in keeping a whole neighborhood in that way. I can imagine some making that decision. Obviously, we respect the decision, and the quote you've used, does convey the sort of argument, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that we can agree that it is up to them to decide. And it's their decision how to remember and to leave a monument, to leave a few of these houses as a monument, or only one, or, and again, how to rebuild. The next kibbutz, major kibbutz that needs to decide this is Nir Oz, that a third of their residents were either murdered or kidnapped on October 7th. I have to tell you, Jonathan, as someone who saw, well, obviously, like you walked through the kibbutzim, but also the command center in the Nahal Oz base was kept as it is. It is going to turn into a monument. It's a harrowing thing to see. It's incredibly difficult, but you understand what happened there on October 7th, and what those soldiers went through, and those young women. And so I think that there is an importance to do it. Of course, I said first and foremost it is the decision of the kibbutzim. there's also some sort of government involvement, in this sort of thinking, but because it is the same government that was in place when October 7th happened, this, of course, is very charged with how to remember. So it's a question, and we will be seeing more and more of these examples in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I can imagine those communities thinking to the government, look, you weren't here on the day. You weren't here even for the aftermath. I mean, it was civil society that had to look after those people and step in. You have no say over what we do next. It's something perhaps we don't think about enough. The disengagement puts it very politely, the disconnection between the communities struck on October 7th and their own government, the antagonism really they feel. I think it took, we all tell me, the best part of 2 years, 18 months or something before Prime Minister Netanyahu even visited those kibbutzim. They didn't want him there. He knew he would get a very rough ride when he went there. There's a real chasm between them.
He went to Nilo only recently. He went to Be'eri before, but yes, it took a very, very long time before he came there. There's a political chasm between them, and as you said, an antagonism. Of course, it's connected to the fact that Netanyahu doesn't want a commission of inquiry. All of that, and still the prime minister. All that is very, very charged. So in that vein, I mean, we have to maybe connect to the fact that this week during Netanyahu's trial, yes, that is still continuing, even though he submitted an official request for pardon, or essentially to stop his trial. But that is continuing, and a group of bereaved families just came into the courtroom. They weren't trying to stir up anything. They weren't trying to, protest. They just came, and they said they wanted to look him in the eye and ask him for, even in their presence, to ask for a commission of inquiry. One of the guards in the courtroom kind of tried to take them out or say that they were waving signs. They weren't, but that created a bit of a commotion, just another indication of just how this wound is still an incredibly open one in Israeli society.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned before, it shocks me each time that when they're not treated with a sort of deference, even kind of reverence. I mean, I remember this with the hostage families. They would be shouted at when they went to Knesset committee hearings and sort of abused. It's shocking to me still. I thought
by a minority,
one of those,
right? Not by most Israelis.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
Sure, of course. No. And they, in that particular case, that Knesset committee hearing, it was people in the religious Zionism party of Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir. They didn't have any compunction, any hesitation about really sort of dishing it out and making all kinds of accusations. In my naivety, I thought even people, wherever they were on the spectrum, and we are talking about a minority, would feel as an obligation to be restrained and polite when it came to those families, as if they were off limits. In a way, it's like the Gold Star families in the United States. And Donald Trump just rode right through that and started attacking those families. He broke a kind of taboo. That's the sort of taboo I thought was there. It's obviously not there. And so their treatment at the trial that you referred to is all part of that. And just when we're on sort of domestic scene in Israel, the coalition has been rather busy.
Yes, I mean, what we're seeing now is sort of two things. One, the fact that the ultra-Orthodox have been thus far for a few months boycotting the coalition, not voting with Netanyahu because they wanted a draft bill to exempt most of the community from military service. So it was very hard for the coalition to get anything done. And now as this draft bill is progressing through the Knesset, and we talked about that at length last week, the ultra-Orthodox are back voting with the government. So what you have is really a blitz of legislation, a lot of it focusing on what this government wants to focus on, which is to curtail the power of the judiciary in any of that areas, and of course to curtail the power of the media. So you will see a lot of bills. A lot of them have been, have passed in first reading, some of them second and third. This all has to do with the timing of the elections and when we think that will happen. I would say the common sense is to look at March. Netanyahu has to pass a budget. It will be a very, very difficult budget with a lot of cuts obviously because of the defense budget that needs more and more resources. So I think that will be the sort of first big stone in the road. And if the Knesset fails to pass that, then the coalition dissolves and we're looking at elections in June. So it all has to, with every piece of legislation, I get a lot of questions, is this going to pass? It really has to do with how long it will take the coalition and how soon elections are.
Yeah, and that's becoming the prism through which we look at everything now, and exactly, it's all about the calendar as we go into 2026.
Yes, and it more and more is clear, and this is true to every leader everywhere in the world, that a leader somehow lives a filtered reality, right? He doesn't really meet the people without bodyguards. He can't really sit around and listen to what the common person is thinking and talking about, because that's just the nature of what you do. But more and more, when you are a prime minister accused of never taking, in fact, not even accused, I think it is safe to claim, never taking responsibility for October 7th in any way, then that sort of filtered reality has to grow in many ways, or that sort of layer between you and the rest of the nation has to become a thicker one, because the more the Netanyahu supporters would blame everyone else but him for what happened on October 7th, the more you need to, distance the leader from everything that is being said. And you see this, Netanyahu is not doing interviews in mainstream media in Hebrew. He's not doing almost press opportunities. It's all recorded messages. And more, that is the sort of feeling that there's a filtered reality. And it goes into that story of the courtroom. Like, it wasn't even possible for bereaved families to just sit there without doing anything, just being there. It adds to that, I think.
It does raise an interesting question about what campaigning will look like come the election. Mm-hmm. If somebody has to be that insulated, that's going to be a very different kind of campaign.
A lot of social media. That is the answer. But if we are on the topic of social media, we actually want to talk about politics in another country, which is the United States. We have been talking, I think, or at least in Israel, focusing on what is happening on the American left and the sort of anti-Zionist voices. But I think, and we've been teasing this a little bit, you and I, on the podcast, but I think what is happening on the American right, Republican, MAGA, Trump supporters, what is happening, vis-a-vis Israel and Jews in general is fascinating. It's frightening. But I think we have an excellent guest to talk precisely about that point.
J Oliver Conroy is a writer on political culture for Guardian US. He's a colleague of mine, and the author of a recent essay that got a lot of attention. Its headline, White Nationalist Nick Fuentes is exposing a civil war among Republicans. It rather brilliantly dissected a phenomenon that we have been talking about a fair bit on the podcast. And so we are very glad to have him with us. Oliver, welcome to Unholy.
Thanks very much for having me.
We're very glad. Let's just start at the beginning with the name that was mentioned there in that headline. Just tell us who Nick Fuentes is and how did he come, because he's very young, how did he come to be such a prominent player on the American right?
That's a great question. So Nick Fuentes is a 27-year-old white nationalist and Christian nationalist who live streams a nightly show from Chicago. He first came to prominence in 2016 as a college student when he sort of became kind of a controversial figure at his college campus in Boston because he would walk around wearing a MAGA hat. And then he later dropped out of college and became basically a full-time white nationalist. And the question of how he became so influential is more complicated, but basically he has a pretty big audience of fans known as Groypers who tune in every night to his or five nights a week to his show. These are people who are anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, who have a very far-right vision of what the United States is or should be. And he has hundreds of thousands of fans. Determining exactly how many fans he has is difficult, but he certainly has huge reach online. And he's used that reach to kind of try to pull the more mainstream MAGA right further to the right. And in particular, he's using Israel and anti-Semitism as kind of wedges to try to sort of drive wedges uh, between parts of the right and kind of force more mainstream conservatives to sort of choose a position, basically.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned, of course, this is rhetoric. I mean, this is racism, and there's anti-women hate, and there's violence a lot, and there's violent rhetoric. But his definitely the anti-Semitism is sort of front and center, which is very interesting because when you think of you know what things you would think just originally would not be even sayable in American, language. He even says Hitler is cool. Like it's just, it talks about organized jury. I mean, things that no one would imagine saying out loud, even I think 5 or 10 years ago. And this man is becoming much less fringe and much more mainstream.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. And I mean, it's obviously he is a far right figure. He is barred from attending CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. So certainly there has been a kind of cordon sanitaire that has kind of barred him out of polite mainstream MAGA conservatism, or whatever you want to call it. But certainly that barrier seems to be falling down. And Fuentes has appeared in recent months on a number of more relatively mainstream platforms. He was on Glenn Greenwald's show. He was interviewed recently by Tucker Carlson on his show. And it certainly seems as if he and his ideas are suddenly much more mainstream in a way that would have been unthinkable even, 5 years ago.
I want to get to the Tucker Carlson interview because that's obviously a crucial moment. But just to locate exactly the worldview, I mean, I first came across him because I saw this video, which I have to say I found absolutely chilling, of him smirking throughout a whole riff of Holocaust denial, in which he ran this argument, which used to be extremely fringe, that there was simply not the kind of physical capacity in the Nazi death camps to have killed this number of Jews. The ovens weren't big enough and so on. And he did this performance with this smirk in which he never referred to Jews. He referred to, let's say, you're baking cookies and 6 million cookies and so on. It was absolutely sickening and chilling all at once, and particularly this smirking expression. Holocaust denial is one of the things we haven't mentioned. I'm just keen to know whether he is, as it were, one of those old school anti-Semites who thinks that the Jews are at the center of it all. In other words, yes, they're against black people and Muslims and, gay people, but they see all those people as, in a way, tools used by the all-powerful Jew at the center. Is he that kind of full-strength, old-style, Nazi-style anti-Semite, or is his hatred of Jews just in among all the other diverse groups that he hates?
Good question. I'm trying to do a sort of a typology of hatred in my head.
Yeah.
I think he is, well, he's both, but I think Jews are kind of the central unifying theme, and certainly the group that he talks about more than any other. So I would say closer to the first. Yeah.
Right. That's telling.
And again, it drags into, and you mentioned this, he kind of uses, it kind of feels like he's using Israel as this, I don't know, lightning rod or some way to sort of drag Republicans to show who's with him and who's against him. But it's really interesting because you would say, obviously, sadly, as an Israeli, I have to say, Israel is far today from being a bipartisan issue like it used to be, I don't know, a decade ago, 2 decades ago. But you would think of like the Republican Party having a sort of, sound evangelical base, very pro-Israel. Even the sort of neocons, what is left of them are pro-Israel. And he and the sort of, again, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon's are voicing this very, very anti-Israel voice in the Republican Party. How influential is that?
Yes, that's a good question, and that's kind of the central question of my recent piece about Fuentes, more so than about Fuentes himself. I mean, I think that the thing that's complicated about all of this is that somebody like Fuentes has been very uh, good at intertwining his anti-Semitism with more mainstream, legitimate political criticisms of Israel or of the U.S. relationship with Israel in a way that's made them difficult to disentangle. And he's doing it also at a time when Israel has kind of become this hot button issue on the, well, in general, but on the American right. And I think that people like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, others have really realized that um, the zeitgeist has changed a lot and that the American people are no longer as uniformly behind Israel as they once were not that long ago. And that within the right specifically, Israel is a kind of wedge issue. It's kind of like the last sacred cow. And that the people that you were talking about, the neocons, the Christian Zionists like Mike Huckabee, they are very much out of the mainstream. They may be in the majority for the time being, but in some ways they're kind of dinosaurs. People like Ted Cruz are regarded as dinosaurs by younger conservatives, by younger people on the right. And I think people like Tucker Carlson understand that very well. Certainly Nick Fuentes understands that, and are keen to um, indicate that they're with the younger generation.
This generation, I have to say, this generational thing completely fascinates me. I'm not sure I'd clocked this until I read you on this, partly because on the podcast, we have talked so much about what seems to me a mirror image of this, which is in the Democratic Party on the left, where the younger generation are moving away from the Zionism of their elders. So it's absolutely typified by, if you like, Zoran Mamdani, young, anti-Israel, Joe Biden, old, pro-Israel, and that fault line in the Democrats. What you're saying is that something similar is going on, I think much less noticed, on the right. You had this line in your piece, you said, at the time, younger evangelical Protestants increasingly regard Christian Zionism as a bizarre and embarrassingly dated tick of their boomer parents. So just explain the generational element for that, and whether it is a bit like what's gone on the Democrats. How much is this about Israel's own conduct? For example, sympathy for Palestinians who were on the receiving end of the Israeli response to October 7 over these last 2 years. Is it about that, or is it about some other thing that's not really about Israel's own behavior?
Yeah, the honest answer is it's kind of all of the above. Is it about uh, uh, Israel's conduct and the war? Is it about anti-Semitism? Is it about um, an older America First paleo-conservative isolationist wing of the GOP reasserting itself? Is it about horseshoe theory and the far left and the far right kind of converging in certain respects? The honest answer is it's kind of all of those things. And with some people it may be more of one than the other, but certainly all brought together, it has become a fairly sizable, if maybe not yet a majority force on the right. Certainly, Donald Trump still certainly seems to be fairly pro-Israel, even if he's kind of inconsistent about it. But yeah, as you said, there's this generational divide that's very real, and younger conservatives, some of whom would even call themselves conservative, because conservative is kind of a dirty word to them that they associate with older conservatives of the more kind of Reaganite, William F. Buckley, mold. Their attitude is, we're America first, and we thought Donald Trump was America first, and when you said you were America first, we took you at your word. And they've taken that logic to its maximum, final degree, basically.
By the way, if they don't use the term conservative, what term would they use to call themselves?
Well, they would identify it maybe as populists. I don't know what maybe they would call themselves just right wing, but certainly conservative is one of those terms that means different things to different people. Yeah. And for some younger people on the right, they associate it with somebody from the George W. Bush administration.
So let's move on to discuss the Tucker Carlson interview and why this was so much more than just an interview. Like, what happened?
So in late October, shortly before Halloween, which I'm sure was just coincidental timing, but added a certain ironic, perhaps,
Spookiness.
resonance. Yes. Tucker Carlson did I think about 2 hour friendly, you could call it an interview. It was more like a Joe Rogan style long form conversation with Nick Fuentes on Tucker Carlson's extremely popular online talk show, and that was a sensation and immediately controversial for obvious reasons. And it really hit the conservative world, or the right, like a meteor. Um, because although Fuentes has been kind of becoming more prominent or more mainstream very quickly, he still wasn't quite at the level where you would think that somebody like Tucker Carlson would be interviewing him, even though, certainly Carlson has said, kind of adopted some pretty radical positions over the past couple of years since leaving Fox News. He's interviewed some pretty kind of outre guests that were people that would have been very outre at Fox. He's interviewed Daryl Cooper, this sort of podcaster and amateur historian that some critics have accused of being basically peddling soft Holocaust denial or revisionism. I should be careful with my language here for legal reasons, but even then, it was still pretty shocking that he interviewed Fuentes. Obviously, Carlson would probably defend himself, and has defended himself, by saying it was kind of a situation of he had become too big to ignore. But either way, it was immediately controversial, and it kind of it was controversial on its face, but also brought to the fore all of these issues that we've been talking about, all of these generational tensions, ideological tensions, the populists versus the conservatives, the mainstream right versus the far right, pro-Israel conservatives versus the people in Washington known as the restrainers, the kind of Israel skeptics, all of this stuff, as well as this central question of about anti-Semitism, which has been something that has haunted the American right for a long time. So all of it just came to the surface like this weird Halloween surprise.
And then, as you chart, it did have this big fallout where institutions are scrambling. Do they denounce Carlson for putting him on, or do they not? Carlson himself is obviously a hugely influential figure. His show may be, other than Fox News, the sort of focal point of American right media. Did you read that as being that a huge figure like Tucker Carlson now agrees with Nick Fuentes, that he's with him in all the myriad prejudices that we've heard that he articulates? Or was it more that there was Tucker Carlson thinking, I better get with the program, get down with the kids, because the new generation are into this guy, and I need to make sure I'm not left behind? I just don't know how to read that, whether actually what we're seeing is a big chunk of the American right now coming in behind this 27-year-old white supremacist, racist, and anti-Semite.
Mm-hmm. I certainly think that Tucker Carlson agrees with Fuentes' criticisms of Israel. In fact, Carlson has devoted quite a lot of his show over the past year or so to attacking the U.S. relationship with Israel, probably more than almost any other subject I can think of. Just today or yesterday, he released another episode that was basically about this, and was basically arguing that Qatar has been, or would be, a better ally to the U.S. than Israel is. So this is certainly something that Carlson has been kind of going on about for a while. So in that respect, he's very much ideologically aligned with Fuentes. Obviously, he would say he's not anti-Semitic, but when it comes to the actual policy questions at play, there's probably not much distance between them. And Carlson has repeatedly attacked. He has this longstanding kind of hatred of what he calls neoconservatives and Israel hawks. He was enraged by the decision of the U.S. to join the attacks on Iran. Earlier this year, he did an interview with Senator Ted Cruz, who is a very well-known Christian Zionist and pro-Israel conservative, where he basically just completely ripped Cruz to shreds. So in that respect, I think he completely agrees with Fuentes. As to the second part of your question, yes, I think also the people who are the best weather vanes of MAGA populism or of the right within the right, like Tucker Carlson, like Steve Bannon, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, all of them have been becoming much more skeptical, if not outright hostile to Israel, and I think that's telling.
Perhaps this is anecdotal, but I interviewed Mike Waltz just yesterday. He's currently the U.S. ambassador to the UN. He was Trump's national security advisor. And what was interesting, he's a staunch Israel supporter. What was very interesting was when asked about Tucker Carlson and his views, he was very careful not to attack Tucker Carlson personally. He said, Israel is important. Israel is important for this relationship. We need to tell the younger generation. But he didn't attack Tucker Carlson, which is, of course, indicative of just how much power Carlson has in the party.
Yes, and I think many conservatives are very scared of Carlson. In a sense, they should be. He has a huge audience. He's probably the single most influential political commentator or what influencer, whatever term you would want to use, on the right. He's certainly the single most influential one outside of the traditional broadcast platforms like Fox. Maybe in some ways, because of the age we live in, more influential, because podcasts and alternative media have become more important than those things. And he's somebody who is very smart, is very canny, has very shrewd political instincts, and also seems to survive controversies that would sink many other people. He's a bit like Donald Trump in that respect, Teflon Don. And certainly so far he seems to have survived this controversy. And yeah, somebody once told me they'd never bet against Tucker Carlson, which I think is accurate. But yeah, I think absolutely many conservatives are frightened of him. He also has a close relationship with J.D. Vance, the vice president, and he helped get J.D. Vance his slot as running mate to Trump. So that's another complicating factor in all of this.
In common.
Well, that gets us to a question which I think is important, which is we've been talking about the kind of media sphere, the blogosphere, as what we once would have called it, the online environment. In terms of formal politics, this split within the Republican Party, who is on each side at the sort of governmental level? I think you've mentioned a few of those names, Marjorie Taylor Greene and so on. But should we now be thinking that when we talk about Fuentes and Carlson, do we need to include J.D. Vance in that list? Is he part of this movement that is, to put it gently, skeptical of the relationship with Israel, and not, we think, because they have some deep concern, humanitarian concern for the population of Gaza, but because they have some other thoughts there, in the Fuentes case, about Jews and their place in society, if not the world? Where do the big politicians fit? I mean, Vance is obviously the one that people are looking at.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to say. Obviously, many mainstream Republican politicians are still very reliably pro-Israel, and that could be a bit of a tension. Certainly, many of the prominent members of Congress, like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is quite pro-Israel. J.D. Vance is an interesting case. I obviously wouldn't want to insinuate without any evidence that he's Semitic, because I've seen no evidence of that. But certainly he. I don't know what his views on Israel are, but certainly the people who are skeptical of Israel view him as one of their own, or hope that he's one of their own. And I think a lot of this very much is kind of a proxy war over J.D. Vance, because Right now, he, as far as anybody can tell, is the only logical or the primary successor to Donald Trump, who's a lame duck president. And everybody within the conservative movement is hoping that their vision of conservatism or their vision of the right is the one that's going to become is going to be carried forward. And for many people of the new right, that is to say, the more kind of populist, nationalist, isolationist, anti-free trade, anti-free market school of the right, they're hoping that J.D. Vance will be somebody who's sort of like the more ideologically coherent, more intellectual, more politically disciplined version of Trumpism than Trump was. Whether that's true, I don't know, but that's what they hope. And they also hope that he's somebody who's going to be much more skeptical of the U.S. relationship with Israel, the U.S. relationship with Ukraine, and just in general, very much renegotiate America's relationship with the world.
You know, we didn't mention an important piece of this, of course, is the sort of Heritage Foundation being this very important think tank and not denouncing Tucker Carlson for interviewing Nick Fuentes. In fact, even I think Kevin Roberts used the word globalists when he talked about this, refusing to kind of supporting Tucker Carlson. And you listen to Nick Fuentes, and I think, again, anyone, you don't have to be Jewish to have shivers down your spine when you listen to him. You know, he admires Joseph Stalin, all of that rhetoric. But you kind of think, okay, so he is attacking the right from the far right. Is there someone even worse than him somewhere lurking in the shadows?
You raise an interesting point though, which is that the Heritage Foundation and Kevin Roberts and for people who don't know, the Heritage Foundation is this very influential conservative think tank in Washington D.C., probably the single most important or powerful in terms of money and influence conservative organization in Washington D.C. And Kevin Roberts is the head of that organization. And basically, what happened, part of this whole controversy, is that after Carlson's interview with Fuentes, there was this pressure on the Heritage Foundation to distance itself from Carlson, because the Heritage Foundation had some personal and commercial ties with Carlson. And Kevin Roberts, the head of the foundation, put out this video statement that actually, to many people's surprise, not only did not distance himself, but actually very much defended Carlson, less so, but maybe by, by continuation, by implication, Fuentes. And basically said anti-Semitism is very clearly wrong. He did not. You can't say that he did not condemn anti-Semitism, but also said, conservatives are allowed to question America's relationship with any other country in a very pointed way that until recently would have been rare on the right, and that sparked huge ideological civil war inside the Heritage Foundation, which later came to kind of encompass more and more of the right. But it's been fascinating to see. And Roberts is an interesting case because he's somebody who is very much of that kind of MAGA culture warrior, anxious not to be perceived as insufficiently hardcore, has become more critical of Israel in a way that many of these figures have, and clearly also believes that the zeitgeist is moving in that direction, of being more skeptical or hostile of Israel.
This maybe have to be our last question, but we're hovering over this conversation has been Donald Trump himself, and people, as you say, are looking to the future and thinking about J.D. Vance, but just on the Israel piece of it, actually, and also I think a lot of American Jews on the right as well have sort of placed a bet on Donald Trump, thinking that he's a solid friend of Israel, he's a solid friend of the Jewish community. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, is Jewish, and his grandchildren are Jewish, and Ivanka converted, and so on, and they sort of comfort themselves with that thought. Is your assessment that, as it were, lasts, or do you think, if the wind is blowing towards the Fuentes-Carlson kind of worldview, does Donald Trump follow that himself? I would think of your point about Qatar is a better friend than Israel, says Carlson. I could imagine Donald Trump nodding along to that. I mean, does he move, or is he somebody that Netanyahu, who placed his bet, can depend on?
Well, that's the eternal question. I mean, the problem with depending on Trump is that
Yeah.
he's flaky and temperamental. He's transactional, and he can be your best friend one week and your worst enemy the next, and then go back to being your best friend. And that's true as many, many countries, politicians, and different groups of people have learned that. Um, the question of his stance towards Israel, I don't know. Certainly, there was a recent controversy, as I'm sure you're aware, involving Mike Huckabee having a kind of off the books meeting at the U.S. embassy in Israel with Jonathan Pollard, a man who's convicted of spying for Israel, that is considered by many Americans to be a literal traitor. And Huckabee had this sort of kind of made this kind of bizarre, unforced error decision to have this meeting with him. That enraged many people in the MAGA movement. They were furious, I think somewhat understandably so, about that. And Trump declined to he has so far declined to sort of discipline Huckabee as far as I'm aware for that. So in some respects, he's still Trump does still seem to be a fairly conventional pro-Israel president, but he's somebody whose whims change, and also at the end of the day, he's a lame duck president who's not going to be in office for that much longer, and who's not going to be the torchbearer of the Republican Party or the conservative movement for that much longer. So I don't know.
I have to say, as the Israeli in the conversation, this is all reassuring in so many ways. But it was a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for talking to us, Oliver. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I found that really, illuminating. I'm not going to say it was
Yeah.
cheering, because it wasn't. But I think really, really illuminating. And I definitely was aware myself that I've been noticing things on the American left and hadn't. This generational shift, I know I sort of went on about it, but that to me is fascinating. That,
Yeah.
and it goes to the thing I was saying. I just think Netanyahu and the others made an assumption that the Christian right's support for Israel was a given, was permanent, sort of granite that would never move. And what it shows you is things are dynamic, things do move. And so it may not have been such a wise bet to sort of write off the Democrats and the left. We don't need them, the universities, they're all liberal, because we've got the Christians and the Christian right. Maybe that is an unsound bet.
Yeah, I mean, even before we get to the sort of the Netanyahu bets, I'm just talking about that kind of alliance that has been created between the kind of old school anti-Semites, right, the far right anti-Semites, and the sort of isolationists on Israel, and them together being this group that has so much power in the Republican Party. I mean, and we can't look away from that. It's a really concerning trend. When you add to that what you pointed out, I think really interestingly, that whole generational thing, right? Israel is not cool for the younger generation, one fears. All that together in the mix is really worrying. There was this poll done by the Manhattan Institute, by the way, inside the Republican Party, and it kind of adds into what we were saying, that 37% of Republicans say the Holocaust was exaggerated or didn't happen. I mean, these are stats from today, and so if you add that into everything that we have been talking about, it's just really it's frightening, to be honest.
I was speaking with someone who watches anti-Semitism as a problem very closely in terms of protecting the Jewish community. And they were very clear that, look, day to day, the threat to synagogues and schools is, this was a person speaking about the European picture, is jihadist violence, extremist Islamist groups. Yes. The long-term thing that is really worrying them is this, because if the American Republican Party realigns to be anti-Israel, but not anti-Israel because they care so much about Palestinians, but anti-Israel because they think the Jews are the root problem of all their misfortunes, to use a deliberately historically loaded form of words, that is really serious business, because it's, first of all, 5 million plus Jews live in the United States. but also it is a sort of trend setter, a standard setter for the whole of the, Western world. And this could be normalizing something that for 80 years or so has been regarded as beyond the pale. I mean, Fuentes himself there's nothing ambiguous about this. This is a chillingly racist anti-Semite, and he embraces that term. He said Adolf Hitler is really effing cool. This is a frightening figure. And so I thought Oliver really, set out the terrain for us, and I think it will be one subject we will be coming back to, I'm sure. I think you're kicking us off with a chutzpah nomination.
So we're discussing the Columbia report, the Anti-Semitism Task Force. I think it has released its fourth and final report. This is very important to show what has been going on in the school and what the Jewish students have been, suffering and going through during this period. The whole report is about Jewish students being singled out and scapegoated. What got our attention, I think, is a quote in which that says that classes on the Middle East were saturated with condemnations of Israel, including falsehoods. One instructor said, and I quote, "Theodor Herzl was an anti-Semite, and Eastern European Jews were not actually Jewish." So obviously, that instructor has never met Eastern European Jews. But what I want, can we focus on? Herzl was an anti-Semite. Herzl, father of Zionism, from the balcony in Basel. Herzl from Herzliya, and who gave his name to Herzl Street. And to Herzl and Sons Falafel. He was an anti-Semite. We can argue about the quality of his drama if you want, but I think that is beyond what we can say.
It's a bit of a reach, isn't it? I mean, is there some argument made to unpack to sort of try and
I tried to search for that, but I couldn't.
No,
it's just, is there an argument made? Who cares? It's not, it's just, it's so ridiculous that it.
Yeah. No, I know. It's, well, a striking nomination, and Columbia again. I mean, they have a habit of cropping up in our award section, usually in one half rather than the other.
Yes, but I think perhaps recommend to listen back to our conversation with Dr. Keren Yarchimilo, who's the Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs. And we had her on Unholy Live, and I think it's very interesting to hear how she talks about how, Columbia tried to combat this anti-Semitism problem. She doesn't deny that it existed, and, she kind of goes through how the school tried to correct itself.
Yes, although she would deny that Theodor Herzl counts as an anti-Semite.
I think she would. I think, yes.
Yeah, I think so. So to our Mensch Award then, I think we should give this to a publisher this week. Full disclosure, it is Pushkin Press, who actually published King Winter's Birthday, the little children's story that I hadn't put my name to last year. The important point is they are really in the business of recovering, and that was true of King Winter's Birthday too, old stories that have been somehow lost. They have just released a new anthology of the work of Bruno Schulz, who the great Isaac Bashevis singer called a Polish Franz Kafka. David Grossman, Israel's foremost living novelist, wrote of him that life explodes on every page he wrote. And yet most people won't, I think, know that name. And that is because Bruno Schulz, his writing life and his life was cut short. He published 2 books of short stories in the 1930s. In 1942, Bruno Schulz was shot dead by an officer of the SS. And so it took a long time for people to sort of rediscover his work. It happened some 40 years after his death. Philip Roth was a big champion. The New Yorker published some of his work. Cynthia Ozick. Various people have really tried to say this is one of the great writers, and so Pushkin Press are bringing it out again. The collection is called Nocturnal Apparitions, Bruno Schulz, but to Pushkin Press, a Mensch award for bringing this great writer to perhaps a new audience some 80 plus years after his murder.
Agreed. We are in total agreement mode on the awards this week. What's
Getting
wrong with
weird.
the universe? It must be a storm heading our way.
Byron
will-
in storm form.
I will
is
update
messing
you
with us.
on how this is going, Jonathan. I will during the day. We should also say that for subscribers, we have a bonus episode of questions and answers that took us to quite interesting alleyways. I would really recommend that.
Yeah.
And we will meet next time.
See you then.